Hello Nitterati, Amber here with a tutorial for you today, the Calvaria Scarf and Cowl tutorial. This is a fun lace pattern that features a skull motif, making it fun for Halloween, something for all the family, a scarf or cowl pattern to wear, and is fairly versatile. This project here is knit in DK weight. I'll be demonstrating in a bulkier weight yarn, and you could certainly switch down to a lace or fingering weight if you want something more delicate. Lots of options. I'll demonstrate some of the techniques used in this project, including the cast on, which occurred here, a little tip on the eyes, and for the cowl only the grafting of the ends. The scarf is just bound off for each end, leaving them dangling free, and the cowl is joined to create the loop that you see. It is fun, obviously, with the gradient yarn, which I've used here, and just a tip about the yarn is that the project is started here with a cast on, a provisional kind of cast on, where 2 sets of live stitches are worked. Initially, one set will be worked in this direction, and then the other set will be picked up and worked in this direction. So with the I used 2 50-gram skeins of the same gradient. So each 50-gram skein started with the olive green and ended with the light green, which meant that I could start with the olive green when knitting this side, and then when I came back to knit this side, I started with the second ball, the second skein, and worked the yarn that way. And they both joined in the center here and match. So it may take a little figuring out with the gradient skein. Each skull section is a pattern block, and they could also be worked in separate colors. So you could have a patchwork effect with different colors, green, orange, black, or as I'm doing with this one, a single color. And with the scarf that I'm currently working on, I'm also using a single colored yarn, but it's quite speckly. So you can see the directions of the skulls change, and that's just at the cast on point. So the skulls are worked topped down this way initially, and I worked 3 skulls for this cowl. And then I came back and picked up the stitches and worked top down this way. And this means when you're wearing it, the skulls are all facing up or down if you wear it upside down, and that they're joined at the bottom by their chins. The scarf is worked the same. I cast this on and have worked 3 motifs so far. I'm planning 200-gram 2-skein version of the scarf, so I'll knit 5 or 6 skulls for quite a longish scarf. It's fairly narrow, and I plan to wrap it around my neck a few times. You can see that I've held the stitches here at this cast on point. So these are joined together, the needles. I'll be able to put the needle tips back on when I'm ready to knit back in the other direction. So in the meantime, those stitches are held, and that will be the first part of this tutorial, demonstrating the cast on. Okay, we'll get started. I have my 2 needles, 2 sets of needles as mentioned, the yarn. I'll be casting on 30 stitches on each needle, so a total of 60 stitches, 60 live stitches. And similarly to a long tail cast on, I'll be casting on with a tail, and I need to ensure that that tail will be enough for 30 stitches. And then I'll be working on this side as well. So I'm just guessing here, and I'll begin with a slip knot and place that on what will be the back needle, the second set of stitches. And then bring the front needle. So I have the 2 needles with the 2 colour cables. You don't need 2 different colour cables, but it will be a little bit easier for showing you today. And I'll take the yarn, have one over my forefinger here and the other over my thumb. So there's the 2 ends of the yarn, one that's coming from the cake and the other tail that I pulled out with a slip knot in between. This counts as 1 stitch, so I've already cast on 1 stitch. I'll be casting on 30 on each set of needles for a total of 60, so 30 stitches, 30 stitches, so 1 here on that top needle or the second needle. The stitches will be cast on by wrapping the yarn over and under the needles. The yarn from my top, the forefinger, will always go over the bottom needle, and the yarn from my thumb will always go over the top needle. So it's just alternating between needles and fingers. Beginning with the bottom needle, because I already have 1 cast on, and the top yarn, I bring that yarn under, over and in between the 2 needles. So that's 1 stitch cast on each needle. Now for the top needle, I'll be using this bottom yarn. I'll bring it behind the needles, up, over and between. And that's 2 stitches cast on. Repeat for the bottom, so I'm using that top yarn for the bottom needle. Bring it behind, under, over and through. And it becomes pretty fast. Once you get the hang of it, it actually becomes quite a fast cast on, as I'll just quickly demonstrate. So now I've cast on 6 stitches on each needle, 2, 4, 6. Now it's good to keep them loosish, you don't want them too tight there, so just keep the tension even. And continue to cast on. So now I need to do a 7th stitch on the top using the bottom yarn, bring it behind, up, over and through. 7th stitch on the bottom, behind, up, under and through. And that's it. It's actually quite easy. So then I'll get to the point where I have the 30 stitches on each needle. I'll just keep, oops, where are we? Keep casting those on. And here I am with 30 stitches on each set of needles. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 2, 4, 6, 8, 30, 30, 30. And now I'll be working across this set of stitches. I'll work a row across those and then hold the right number of stitches, or keep hold of that thread of yarn there and pull what was the top set of needles. I've now flipped it around, it's now the bottom set, pull those through. And I won't be using those stitches for a while, so I'll just take those needles off and place them on a holder. Which could either be one of these little keepers, or I'll use this joiner and join them together in a loop. That way, if I need the extra needle for the other live stitches, I can use that there. So we'll join those together for later and work what was the bottom set of stitches, now the live set of stitches. Bring that yarn under, being sure to capture that loose end to hold that stitch in place. So we'll begin on what we'll consider now the right side, and you can see the pearl ridges on the wrong side. And keep this tail secured. So this is the tail for that last stitch on the needle where we're holding the stitches. And bring the working yarn up and just hold that for the first few stitches to keep it in place. And we're going to dive straight into the pattern. So row 1 of lace A, and we'll just start working those stitches, which are knit 2 initially, then knit 1, and we'll start the lace section with the yarn over, slip, slip, knit, and continue down that row. And we'll see that essentially the cast on stitches form the stockingette row between those two right side rows. So that'll work quite neatly. When you come back to the second half and working these stitches with lace B, you begin the row on this end and just keep the right side facing for that first row. Okay, so I've knit on the chart and I'm currently on the wrong side row where I'm about to work into those double yarn overs for the eyes. I found a few people have found that tricky, so I thought I'd include that in the video. And just before I start, just a note on that particular row, it ends with the yarn over and then 2 slip stitches. And yeah, just want to mention that because it can be quite easy to lose the yarn over on the way back. So just be careful to bring that yarn over back over when you work those first 2 purl stitches on the wrong side row. Each wrong side row where that yarn over is the stitch before the slipped stitches, because it can be quite easy to drop. So I purl along to the place of the 2 yarn overs, a double yarn over, and it can be easy to purl merrily along and miss it, but anyway, get to that point where there's a double yarn over, and you need to create 5 stitches into the 2 yarn overs, which will be purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. So I work 3 into the first yarn over, purl, pull the needle through, but don't pull the stitch off the needle. Bring the yarn behind the work for the knit, work a knit, leave that stitch on the needle, bring the yarn forward for the purl. So that's purl, knit, purl, 3 stitches. I'll take that first yarn over off the needle, bring the yarn back over for a knit, and then back for the purl. And that's the 5 stitches worked into the 2 yarn overs. A little bit of a loose there, but that's fine. That will tighten up and you can adjust that when working back. I just kind of stretch the stitches over. So you can see the 5 stitches worked into the double yarn over there, creating the eye. It happens again with the nostrils. It's a single yarn over and 2 stitches are worked into that, a purl and a knit. So just note that they're the two wrong side rows that have more than just purl stitches. So back to the second eye, have the double yarn over, purl, leave that stitch on the needle, knit, bring the yarn back, purl, that's 3 stitches, take the stitch off the needle, bring the yarn behind the work for a knit, and to the front for the final purl, so that's 2 more stitches, and take that stitch off the needle, 5 stitches. And as mentioned, they will spread out over that loose bit when you're working, creating a big eye. Things get a bit spookier here. For this shorter cowl, I worked 2 skulls, one each from the center cast on point. And then I blocked it flat. I find it a bit easier to block the cowl flat before joining. And now I'm ready to join the 2 ends together to form the loop. I kept a good amount of yarn ready to graft with. So I kept a long tail, particularly long for this thicker yarn. And we'll work this with the wrong sides facing in. So I'll be working across the stitches this way, have that working yarn to the back of my work. And I will pop a needle end on here, the held stitches. So I only need the 2 needles. These can stay at the other end. And a tapestry needle to work this. So I will thread the yarn that I have available. And give myself not too long a tail, and begin by working the setup. So I've worked each pattern row to the last right side row indicated and didn't purl back across, so you can see those stitches haven't been purled, and in effect that's what this will be doing. I'll be grafting across the stitches and it will create a join that's similar to a purl row, joining them together. Because of the slip stitches, my yarn starts here, and that's okay. Firstly, there's 2 setup stitches, and that is by bringing the yarn from the back to the stitch in front, the first stitch in front, and with the needle push through and pull that stitch purlwise. So I went into the stitch as if I was to purl that stitch. Then the setup stitch for the second needle is to do the same, but push that needle through knitwise. So they're the 2 setup stitches. And now I'll work the grafting stitch. And that is on the first needle first, push the tapestry needle through knitwise and slide that stitch off, pull through. Then, like the setup stitch, go back through the next stitch purlwise and leave that on the needle. So essentially that's the setup stitch worked again. On this side, you'll work that first stitch purlwise, pull the needle through in the yarn and let that stitch slide off. And then the next setup stitch is knitwise. Leave that stitch on the needle. And that's it. We'll continue working the stitches in that order. So it is a knit and slip off, and then a purl for the setup. Then purl, slip off at the back, and knit for the setup. Leave that stitch on the needle. And continue, and just keep tugging and adjusting the tension as you go. And again, knitwise, slip off the needle, purl, set up, leave on the needle, purl, slip off the needle, and knit, leave on the needle. 1, 2, 3, 4. You see them starting to come together. Knit off the needle, purl, leave it on the needle. 1, 2, step 3, purl, slip off the needle. Step 4, knit, and let that go through. I do like to speed it up a bit. Once you get used to the rhythm there, you can actually work it on each needle, only pulling the thread through once. So if you go knitwise, and then come through and do the purl, and then pull through, just makes it a bit quicker. And on the back, purlwise, slide off, and then knitwise through. Knitwise off the needle, purl. Purlwise off the needle, knitwise. And continue like that. I've continued on a little further, and you can see how the lines of the pattern flow into each other, and it's quite difficult to see where it joined, which is the fun of this technique. Can get a little jumbled. I find that I just need to give myself some space and time to focus on this and get it done in one go. If I get distracted and lose track of where I was at, then things can get out of sync, and I do find it a bit tricky to go back. I just manually thread back through each stitch and undo it stitch by stitch and put them back on the needle. It is doable, and I have undone large chunks of work when they haven't lined up, and I realise what has happened where I've gone out of sync. So I think it's worth, firstly, just giving yourself that time in the first place where you're feeling clear in your mind and fresh, and focus on the task, and then hopefully you won't need to undo it. And if you do undo it, just bite the bullet and undo it, tink back a bit and get started, and you'll be back on track again. And you can just check by making sure you have the same number of stitches after you've removed the stitch on the second needle. So after the 4th step, that you should have the same number of stitches remaining on each needle. Then you'll know you're on track. And I'm up to the last 4 stitches. So knit, purl, purl, knit, then knit, purl, and done. I will use the needle to weave that end in and secure it into the cowl. Just make sure I'm happy with it first. And then I'll give this part a little gentle block, since it's fresher. And done.